Happy St. Patrick's Day. As usual here in Newfoundland, we get Sheila's brush just before St. Patrick's Day to make everybody kind of wonder if they're going to be able to enjoy the celebrations after all. It never fails. Every year we get it. Every single year. Always that snowfall just before St. Patrick's Day. Sheila's brush never fails. Sheila will always continue to enact her revenge every St. Patrick's Day. So we have it again this year. So we had a few beautiful days, sunny and really nice and everything, and you can get that spring-like mood. And then, here we go. Oh yeah, we forgot about Sheila, didn't we? For all people who are got a tinge of Irish blood in them, they'll know what Sheila's brush means. Anyway, today I have a real treat because I'm going to read a story in its entirety from a story that was published in the Newfoundland Herald some years back. I was a columnist for the Newfoundland Herald, and this is the premiere edition right here. My name is on the front cover here, Geraldine. Oh, I forgot to say who I am, didn't I? Geraldine Ryan Lush. Geraldine Ryan Lush right here. And this is the premiere edition. The story I'm reading is not from this edition. It's from another issue of it. The premiere edition had the story Katie's Pictures. And right here, see, it's the premiere edition, a premiere issue of my column, and it was stories that were serialized every week. They're all written by me. They were published in the Newfoundland Herald, which is the provincial entertainment publication in Newfoundland, Labrador, Canada. So anyway, I'm going to read a story from which was published in that publication, but I only have the copy of it. It's the book of copies that I made because I don't have all the issues of this around, so I'm sure they're around, but it's too much to go looking for them for sure. So I just kept the premiere issue in my bookcase and so on. So, but anyway, when it was first published in 1996, wow, it's a long time ago. But it was early in my writing career, and I already had 2 books out though, and I was commissioned by the Newfoundland Herald to do a serialization in their publication, which I did, and every week there would be a section of the story appear in their magazine, province-wide. So anyway, this story is called The Listener. That's how it was published as, The Listener. But I'm going to change the title today to another title because I'm going to put it out in book form. So the new title is The Man Who Couldn't Stop Talking. So anyway, it has a bit of a message in it where you kind of give back to old age what you received in childhood. If you received gifts from an elderly person when you were a child, they influenced you in some way through their kindness and through what they gave themselves at some part of your life. Well, you remember to respect them in their older years and pay homage to them in your older years. That was a pretty well theme of the story. So I hope I don't get too hoarse or something. It's not really long. So, oh my goodness. Oh, I was going to say, do I have it all here? I think it's 2 pages, but the thing is that they're ideal for picture books because each section would be some text on a picture book. So this is what I'm doing. I'm going to have them come out in picture books. In fact, they were written, I think, with picture books in mind in the beginning. I had that format in my head, and I wrote concise stories that would be applicable and appropriate to picture books. So anyways, I will begin. Mr. Malcolm McEmberley was a talker. Remember now, the new title is The Man Who Couldn't Stop Talking. He talked from the time he got up in the morning until he went to bed at night. Sometimes he didn't go to bed until the sun came up. So he talked right around the clock. Everyone said he could talk the ears of a brass monkey. Whenever Mr. Malcolm McGimberley visited Jacqueline's house, a chair was put in place in a corner of the kitchen for him to sit on. And everyone looked at each other and rolled their eyes and resigned themselves. They knew it was going to be a long night. For Mr. Malcolm McGimberley talked about everything. He would talk about his boyhood, the weather, and what time his pet rooster had crowed that morning. He would talk about politics and pension checks and the long-lost city of Atlantis. He would tell joke stories, ghost stories, horse stories, and constellation stories, and whether the council would put in streetlights this year. He would talk about his days in the army. Sometimes Jacqueline's mother would try to join in. She would wait until Mr. McGimberley had stopped for breath. Then she would start by saying something. But nothing ever got a chance to come out because Mr. McGimberley had taken only a short breath, just long enough to drink a sip of tea before he would start in again. And sometimes Jacqueline's father would interject with, "Is that right? And you don't say," every few minutes just to be polite. Often Jacqueline's mother would glance at the clock and sigh, but Mr. Malcolm McGimberley never took the hint. Not even when the cat was in for the night, and the dog was sound asleep, and the log dropped in the stove, and the kettle had stopped singing, Mr. Malcolm McGimberley would still be talking. He had 3 gold teeth, glasses that made his eyes look poppy, and silver armbands to keep his shirt sleeves up that glistened all the time. He had a crease in his trousers sharp enough to cut a loaf of bread, and his shoes were always shined. Sometimes he would stick his false teeth out and click them back in again, just for fun. And sometimes Jacqueline would get out of her warm bed, creep out to the iron grate, and peer down at the shiny crown of Mr. McGimberley's head. Her mother would still be there, yawning and saying, "Is that right? And you don't say," every few minutes just to be polite. Finally, Mr. Malcolm McGimberley would get up from his chair in the corner of the kitchen, and everyone would be excited. Jacqueline would poke her nose further into the holes in the grate, to see him put on his coat and adjust his silver armbands that glistened all the time. And her father would poke at the chunks of wood in the stove busily. And just to be polite, Jacqueline's mother would say, "Are you sure you don't care for another cup of tea, Mr. McGimberley?" And Mr. McGimberley's face would brighten behind his glasses that made his eyes look poppy. And he would take off his coat. "I don't know, but I will," he would answer, taking the chair once more. And he would start in again about his boyhood, the weather, politics and pension checks, and the long-lost city of Atlantis. Joke stories, ghost stories, horse stories, and constellation stories, and whether the council would put in streetlights this year. He would talk about his days in the army. Sometimes Jacqueline would stay by the grate, looking down at the bald crown of Mr. McGimberley's head when she was supposed to be asleep. And sometimes she would wonder about the long-lost city of Atlantis, and the horse stories, and the ghost stories, and the constellation stories, and how he really played when he was a boy. Her hair would stand on end, and she would get shivers down her spine, but she still stayed by the grate. Many years passed, and Jacqueline forgot about Mr. McGimberley, and the crease in his trousers, and his false teeth that he clicked in and out. She forgot about her father saying, "Is that right?" and "You don't say," every few minutes just to be polite. One day, when many streetlights had been put in, Jacqueline went to visit Mr. Malcolm McGimberley, but he wasn't there in his little house in the village. She found him the next day in a big building in the city. His chair in the corner had a big wheel on each side. He wore his silver armbands that didn't glisten all the time. He wore a silent smile. Jacqueline took out a notebook. She talked to Mr. McEmberley. She talked about joke stories, ghost stories, horse stories, and constellation stories, and what time his pet rooster had crowed these mornings all those years ago. She talked about his days in the army. Mr. McEmberley smiled in peace. The notepad was covered in smudges from the iron grate. And that's The Man Who Couldn't Stop Talking. The original of the story, The Listener, or The Listener is the original title of the story. I'm going to check that. Okay, every now and again I'm always, something about the camera that makes me think the recorder is off, but it's not anyway, so that's fine. So anyways, The Listener, of course, was really the little girl, Jacqueline, you know. That's probably why I had that title on in the beginning. But I guess either title certainly is appropriate to the story for sure, from the perspective of the little girl and the story of the man who, of course, inevitably became older and had moved to a nursing home. So I hope you enjoy that story. And I chose it for St. Patrick's Day because traditionally St. Patrick's Day has always been a time of storytelling and celebration and music and all that. And I thought it would be nice for you to hear that story. So anyway, I want to thank you for tuning in and listening to the story. And I do have, like I've pointed out in other videos, I have a number of books published, some 20 books now. And the other day I came across this last video I talked about ghost stories. And by the way, thanks to everybody that contacted me, and whether on YouTube or in other forums, and actually purchased the books, my ghost books that I talked about. So I think I had talked about the first edition of Hannigan's Hand, because there was 2 editions of Hannigan's Hand. And I didn't have one to show you at that time, I don't think, at least not in that video anyway. But anyway, I found it, the first edition of that really creepy horror story. the one that remember I was saying that I don't know how I wrote it, because it was a horror story really, and most of my ghost stories are creepy, but well, they're not what you would call hardcore horror, even though they're advertised as such different venues. But this one is the one that I was talking about. This one, and its second edition, is the one that I spoke about getting the Barnes & Noble did up banners and everything, and they were quite impressive actually. I'll have to show them to you sometime in their advertising. And you know, they had these books included with some other really celebratory authors like James Patterson and people like that. So I forget the other people now, but anyway, it was very nice actually, and certainly helped in its advancement in sales, that's for sure. So the other books, of course, are doing really well. There are 2 editions of Seashell's Lament. It's a contemporary historical romance set in Newfoundland, and it's fiction. By mistake, in the last video, I said that was a true story. I don't know where my head was, but it's fiction. Fictional, historical, contemporary romance. So, and these 2 I talked about the last time, those collections. My collections of true ghost stories of Newfoundland and Labrador. And, you know, these are the 2 that, along with the others, that sold. At least they seemed to sell after I did the last video. Now, maybe just imagining it, but they did. It's great. I thank you very much. And this is the back of that one, the train and everything, and train station. It's a train station in Avondale, by the way. And same thing on this one here. It's the back cover of this one. So this is actually the back cover of the close-up of the back cover of the train station in Avondale. This I used segments from that site, the train station in Avondale. This is the train right here, and this is the back of the train on this one, the first collection. On the second collection, I used I used the actual building that was there, the original building actually. I don't know when it was built, maybe 1900 sometime. Anyway, it's a portion of the building here, and of course they swept it over and did the back cover as the back of the building, of the train station building, the museum. It's a museum now in Avondale, Newfoundland, which is one of my favorite places to go because my mother was born and raised in a town close to Avondale, and her name was Kathleen Power, and she lived in Harbour, Maine and Avondale, and the three towns in between were Harbour, Maine, Brigus, Avondale, Exception Harbour, and these are all stories from these towns are done in these two books. So, like I said before, though, this is a whole new collection. I keep saying that because people get mixed up and think these are all the same stories as this one, but these are all new stories. Okay, well, I really enjoyed the visit today, and I hope you enjoyed that story. It's one of my favorites. There are other stories, I don't know how many that came out at that time in that magazine, Newfoundland Herald. I don't have an exact number of how many were in, how many came out, how many I put in there, that was as a serial writer, a columnist for them. But there's quite a few anyway, and this is one about Christmas, Mr. McGillicuddy's Secrets. It was a Christmas story. It was actually based on a memory of my own when I stopped believing in Santa Claus. That's what that was inspired by. That's not in book form. I don't intend to put it in book form though. That's a longer one. And then there was Mrs. Woods' Bread. And that's definitely taken from my childhood as well. Mrs. Woods' Bread. A story that my father used to tell us when he'd be going into woods and he had lunch. Of course, the story is fiction, but it was taken from that memory. My mother would pack his lunch for going into woods and so on, and when he would come back in the evening, he used to pretend that some of the goodies in the lunch were treats that Mrs. Woods had given him. And we thought that Mrs. Woods was a real person. We really did believe she was real, and we'd ask him all kinds of questions about Mrs. Woods. And we were so fascinated. And of course, my father would tell all these stories, really, really believable stories of where she lived and, what animals she had and all these fantastic things that he would tell us. And we really thought she was real. Of course, Mrs. Woods was actually a mom who packed his lunch, but, it was a great imaginative time. And so I wrote that story based on that memory, and I created, a rather nice story out of it. So that's going to be in book form as well sometime. I have so much on the go now. I don't know when they'll be up in book form, but all I can say is I'm hoping they will be anyway. And on the front cover of this, believe it or not, is me. I was about 3. So I did this brochure for an event in my hometown 20 years ago. Actually, it was a come home year, and so I did up this brochure and included some stories that were published in this magazine, along with my books and some information about me and excerpts from other stories that were actually inspired by my growing up there. So that's why I have this brochure here. Anyway, I don't want to prolong this again because my second glass video, I couldn't believe it. It was like 56 minutes long. So I won't be cut like that again. So I hope you enjoyed the story, and I hope you have a nice time, St. Patrick's Day. It's still it's cloudy here, but it's milder, and there's no storm. It's just kind of a little bit messy out there, so. Anyway, thank you so very much for tuning in, and I hope you have a lovely day today. Bye.